Fascinating.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of SDRescue. I am Austin Fuller, and I'm joined once again by the fabulous Grayson Fulbright. And today we're going to be looking at an incredible set of emails that actually come from Grayson himself. So Grayson, tell us, what do you have cooking for us?
Yeah, I'm really excited, and thanks for everyone joining us today. What we're looking at is actually one of my own emails. This is an email that I have used in like a real campaign for one of the clients that I consult with, and we're going to actually look through this original and then look at the rewrite I did as a part of what I call optimization testing, which is where I combine, persistent research on the market, as well as looking at the data in the campaign to continuously improve and adjust the messaging so that you can always try to reach the best performance. So we'll be kind of looking at the two sides of that of, here is an email in the original of kind of what I did based on just research and client information alone. And we'll kind of look at some of the holes that even I, trying to launch and be successful for a client, still had in my email, some of the gaps that could be filled. And then in the rewrite, you can see how I tried to not only repair some of the holes that I had, but also take advantage of some of the information I had learned after that kind of initial period with this original. So I think we'll be going through a lot of concepts that we usually go through, but unique about today is we are going to be looking a little bit at kind of what happens to emails when you are changing them from phase to phase when you're trying to test. And we'll get a little bit of a look at how to actually do that, how to make a process out of that for yourself.
I think another thing is that, because this is coming firsthand, battle tested, you can actually, you don't have to give us your exact numbers, but you can actually speak to, hey, we saw this sort of increase or this sort of, you can talk about what you're measuring, what you're looking at in the process. So I think this is going to be an interesting look to see how, if you're an SDR or an SDR manager or somebody that is in charge of some kind of outbound sequence, what is the delta you should be measuring? What are you looking for? What are some, you can give us some insight on that as you have firsthand experience. So I think that'll be a cool insight as well.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's jump into it. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Still at 100%. That's just not how we do things around here. It's only 150. We always go 150%. So here we go. Original subject line: intro and info. Hi name, hi person. I'm reaching out for more information about how your company develops new team talent. Your industry teams are often built lean and grow only when workloads become overwhelming, which can create chaos for teams that don't recognize and fill these talent gaps quickly enough. Our company helps brands like this company and this company accelerate their team building process and scale operations with a virtual on-demand recruiting resource. After reviewing the current team structure at your company, I'm hoping to share my notes with you to see if it makes sense to connect further. Would you be available to discuss via email or phone? All right, before I forget, let's go down into the color code here. Sometimes I forget. Cool. So my first instinct is you lead with the purple and gold, which, as we've talked about, is great combo. In the second paragraph, we know that's a good part. I think that's a good play. So I'm iffy on that first line intro. I don't know how you feel about it, or if this is just like how you start the testing. Maybe you can give some insight there. But I guess it provides context for the email, right? You're reaching out for more information about how they do team talent instead of saying, hey, I want to help you develop your team talent. So I think that's a good step. Whereas typically I get, hi, we do this for you, instead of I'm curious about learning what you currently do, which approaching it from a status quo helps you to avoid offending assumptions. But yeah, that's just my, and I'm sure part of the struggle you go with is jockeying with the client too and what they want. So I'm interested to just hear your perspective, because I think for me as a sales leader, sometimes on emails I get carte blanche and I can write whatever I want, and other times I don't. I get stuck with stuff that I have to put in there that I know like disrupt some kind of formula that I have going. So if you want to talk about that's just my initial reaction to the email, but I'd be interested to hear what it's like on the other from the other side.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you nailed it on the head that I used a very traditional kind of framework that I use for a lot of my emails, which is basically using purple, yellow, and then going into the pitch to present a future state. And for those who are new to our color coding system, basically what that means is, using a story or a description to highlight pain points, and then you've told the story, you highlighted some pains, and then you go into your pitch about how like you can bring about a better future for them. And we talked about how that's a really good approach to format and have a message. However, you also nailed the second piece on the head. I felt like when I wrote this email, I was able to quickly kind of digest what the client was about compared to their competitors and others in the industry, what their buyers and their market were about in particular, especially the personas that they were targeting. But the challenge that I always tend to have when I'm writing emails, this is kind of my Achilles heel, and it's one of the reasons why I make it the forefront of my testing, is the intro. Because in my mind, you take that first line out, and this is a pretty good email, but there are about 100 or 1,000 ways in which you can intro those 4 lines below. And so that's one of the reasons why I think even when I kind of launched it, I wasn't happy with the intro that we came out with here. But the reason why I went with it is twofold. One, this is what I consider to be a stale intro. There is no personalization that could get you in trouble or be a wrong assumption. There's also not anything misleading or anything that might be trying to like clickbait people. It's simply a direct line A to B intro to try to simply, it's almost like a litmus test. It's saying like, all right, like based on my knowledge in this industry or based on my knowledge in this channel, you should be getting around, 50 to 60% open rates if you've got like a decent intro line and a decent subject line. And so I use these sort of like stale intros to just not be creative at the beginning, so much so that I might hurt myself out of the gate, because, it's very easy to launch, right? It's very easy to like have all these ideas and stuff, but the mantra is that you never really know how successful it'll be until you launch it. And so one of the things that I tend to do when I'm building sequences or any email is, if you have problems tying the email together with the intro itself, if you can't figure out how to start the email off, use what I call a stale intro. Get to the point, which for this, I'm reaching out for more information about how you guys are developing team talent. Like I'm not super to the point and saying, hey, I want to sell you and see if you are looking for team talent I can help you find. But I'm still being so to the point that like most people would be able to gather who my client is and what the conversation is going to be about in that first line. And so that's one of the reasons why I put that there. And we'll talk a little bit more about, how I changed it and why I changed it in the rewrite. But that was a very good call out. And that is something that I will kind of close out with, is be very careful about how you intro your emails. And out of everywhere in the email, I would say your subject line and your intros are where you should be most conservative, because if no one ever opens your email, then you've failed the very first step, and all the other time is wasted. And so do what you need to do, especially at the beginning of a campaign, to get some baseline stats that's not going to be biased by some subjective weird creative play that you don't have any data on, or maybe like making these claims about this market that maybe only it's correct for 30%. Instead, just get straight to the point so that you have a good kind of litmus of how things will be going, and then you can work off of that data as a foundation. That's my pitch there.
No, that's awesome. I think that's a really good point, just because I think, when I start a sequence, or if we go launch into a new industry vertical, I try too hard to sound like I know what I'm talking about. It's an easy trap to fall into, right? To like just assume. Whereas if you do like you said, a stale intro or something, I call it plain vanilla. But if you're vanilla, no one's going to be upset that it's vanilla. Nobody gets mad at vanilla. So it's very unassuming. It's very, well, like I said, it's plain. It's not polarizing. So it shouldn't elicit any severe negative reactions. You're trading off mitigating, you're trading mitigating risk you're trading arousing positive emotions to mitigate the risk of offending, which I think is a really good thing to do. at the beginning of a sequence, especially when you're either going, whether it's a new client, a new product line, a new service, a new industry vertical, where there's a lot of unknown. Better to have, go in there with a blank canvas and be able to make conclusions and test from there. So I think that's really important. In science, if you go back to science class, you always have your control and then your actual experiment, right? But you control for the results. And I think this is a good demonstration of how to control for the results in copywriting for email. That's awesome. That's a good tip.
Yep. So one more thing I'll add in terms of just, I guess, like regrets or like mistakes that I think I made that I could go back and change if I could. I do think that, like, me being the guy that wrote this and launched this and got initial data from this, I can tell you that one of the problems that happened is a very, what I would call a very typical issue that you'll see in cold email, which is, and I hear this all the time, you launch and of course, what's the first thing you get in terms of data points? Opens. And so all of a sudden you're getting opens. You're like, okay, things are going pretty good. Look at that, 50%, 60%, maybe 70%. Oh, nice. And then all of a sudden, silence, radio silence. This is a problem that I think happens often when you're kind of getting the levers right and trying to dial into the right style of sequence for the target personas that you're going after. And it could be seen or misinterpreted as you doing a good job, because people overplay opens and they'll look at it and be like, look at this. Like 60% of the people that I sent to open email. And then you ask, how many clicks, how many replies? Like 1%, 2%. And so when this is happening, generally what that indicates to me is not necessarily that I'm rubbing my prospects the wrong way, but maybe that whatever I'm putting in the body of my email isn't either being agreed upon or isn't being digested in the way that I want them to. Because ideally, right, at the very least, I want someone to read this new information I'm giving them, these pains I'm highlighting, and I want them to at least click. It takes one movement, right? So if people aren't even clicking, or if people are unsubscribing and actually taking extra actions to unsubscribe from my campaign, then those are red flags that maybe something in the messaging, based on either how it's positioned or maybe there's too much messaging, but something in the body is impacting my ability to get to next steps. And so the one thing I wanted to end on here is I do think that my story is a little bit too overbearing. I think that if I could have gone back, I probably would have reorganized the way I told the story, because while I'm not using assumptions about them, I do believe I'm using a little bit too many assumptions about the story I'm telling. So it's like, these types of teams are often built lean and grown only when workloads become overwhelming. So it's like someone reading this and trying to like resonate with it would first have to identify with the industry. Then they would have to identify that, yeah, I like my team's built lean. Then they'd have to identify that, oh yeah, we only grow when workloads are overwhelming. And then they would have to actually resonate with this idea of an overwhelming workload. So in my mind, there was too much that I included into that story, which made it harder for the average prospect I'm targeting to actually resonate with it and agree with it. And so we'll kind of go into how I changed that in the rewrite, but that is one thing I identified when going back and looking at the data.
Nice. And you also prime your call to action of discussing stuff over phone or email with sharing your notes and things that you found and alluding to those to prime your call to action for conversion. And you made it a yes or no, or an email phone. It's a binary decision is what I'm saying. Would you be available to discuss via email or phone? And they can either say yes or no, and or email or phone, right? So there's just I think we've talked about that a little bit recently, where you talk about your best practices for call to action or make the actual response. And I like this idea that a lot of your call to actions, maybe not all of them, I understand this isn't a hard and fast law, but if Google, email, or Outlook AI autocomplete can reply to that, can reply correctly to that call to action, you're in a good spot. I think, just because you want to make it easy to say yes or no. You want to make communication easy, because it's so hard to get someone to actually hit reply. And if there's a cognitive workload that needs to be done to respond, you are going to kill, you're missing out on a lot of conversations, I think.
I agree. And I will say that like I've gotten replies from people that I could tell that they were using an auto reply. And I'll say this, that is a new modern third conversion that you can now have on email. Because before there was this kind of spectrum of energy and commitment to where it's like you could either like click, but you'd have to find the link and trust the site and then click on it, or you could take the time to actually write a reply. Now there's one in the middle to where like you could just say like click yes. And I think people need to understand that and adjust to their strategies and the next steps they're laying out to this new world that we're living in.
Same goes for LinkedIn DMs. There's a couple of social platforms that do it, and LinkedIn DMs is one of them. If you're reaching out via LinkedIn DM, I think a best practice, as much as you can, if you can prime that call to action, if you can make it contextually relevant, if the autofill response can respond, you're in a really good, you're at least you're not missing out on a bunch of people who's like, oh yeah, I maybe could talk about that, but I don't feel like, because I'm like that. Where I'm just like, oh, I could reply to that text, but I don't feel like typing it out or speaking it out or, any of that stuff, especially and that's to people I know, like that's not even to some stranger I don't know. So you want to transition to the rewrite? I think we've covered this one pretty well.
Yeah, let's do it.
All righty. Oh, wow. Okay. It's getting excited. Scrolling down. It got shorter, more concise.
It gets shorter.
It got more concise. That's what I should say. It didn't get shorter. It's more concise. Okay. Hi, Austin. I recently found some new ways to quickly unearth talented job seekers and created a guide summarizing these insights. Value. True talent is hard to find and even harder to replicate. So I've spent 15 years building competitive talent sources to help brands accelerate team growth. I'm hoping to share this guide with you and connect about the vision for your company in 2021. Can I follow up with that guide? Here we go. This is okay. This email makes me excited. I'm going to try not to get too visibly excited, but this talks about a lot of the stuff that I think the above email did okay, right? So autocomplete call to action. Autocomplete will fill this out and it'll get it, right? But it's primed from the first sentence, right? This whole email has a very strategic structure. You lead with incentive, right? You have a guide about how to find, quickly unearth talented job seekers. And then your second piece actually gives credibility to your incentive, not necessarily to you or to your company. It does as well, because it says you spent 15 years, but and for the client, the person that you're working on behalf of spent 15 years building this stuff, but it also builds credibility in the value, right? Like it's one thing to have a guide. It's another thing to have a guide that has 15 years behind it, right? I can make a guide today, but it has 1 day behind it. Which one do you want to read? And then, and you also talk about problems at the beginning of the guide. So it's just interesting how things are powered by the guide, but because the guide is the focus, I don't want to say masks or disguises, but at the same time, without directly having to point it out, it builds credibility for you and your competence and understanding of the prospect's potential problem, without having to actually spend writing actual copy saying that, right? You don't have to say, I have 15 years experience, or I understand your problems building teams, and I think a lot of writers, especially SDRs, if you're new, you think that you have to say something about the thing you're trying to accomplish, right? Or trying to say, there isn't a lot of copy like this in emails. They would probably convert better if there were. So just reading this is really fun for me, just because I like watching a setup and it kind of like, as far as me trying to discern and break it down in the middle, not 100% know where you're going. And it's like a change up pitch, right? Where it's going one direction, but it goes another way and it's really complementary. So I don't know, this is just a fun email to break down just for that reason.
Well, thanks. I will say that I feel like I cracked the puzzle a bit in the first email here. And what I actually did, you'll notice that the messaging is a little bit different from the original. And that's also because of more of a macro play I made, because I test themes, the performance of the topics I'm using in emails, but I also test the data by step. And so as I'm building sequences, I'm not always going to have step one be step one. I'm going to be switching it up, but that also requires rewriting the emails and being able to format them for a step one or a follow-up or whatever. And so what I ended up doing here is I took or tried to extract the goal that I had for step one. I tried to extract the same intent that I had for step one, but just using a new topic or a new angle to try to get there. And so at the top, right, I was just trying to talk about what happens when teams get overwhelmed and they don't hire fast enough. I was trying to tackle a really complicated topic that is use case specific and is very based on the type of team and the type of leaders and the type of industry. And it was a very chunky story. And then to kind of make that worse, the story was just a story. If you notice what I did here, one of the reasons I think Austin likes it is because from the first sentence to the last sentence, it's all about the guide. And you could bullet point these emails or these sentences and it would still make sense. But I didn't do it up there. And you can usually tell when you're reading an email and that happens. I call it a disconnect and transition, because if you can't intro your email and then transition into the story you want to tell, and then transition into the ask that you have, people aren't going to follow along with you. People aren't going to read disjointed ideas from a stranger that they don't know. And so one thing I tried to really do here is how can I find or fix my intro problem by finding a thread that I can pull through the whole thing. And after looking at the data, after doing more research on the industry, after talking more with the client, I discovered, well, hey, recruiting in HR it's a tough space. It's competitive. The data already immediately showed that it was going to be harder to get benchmark performance than, say, like, manufacturing or health and wellness, where things are just booming right now, right? And so with that being said, we decided, okay, we need a better incentive. We need a better thread to pull people through to a next step. And once I found it, all of a sudden the intro was easy. Because here's one cool thing about this that I don't think you might have noticed, Austin, but that intro right there in this rewrite is still what I would consider to be a stale intro. I did not get fancy with it. I'm making 2 factual statements. I found some new ways to do this and created a guide for it. Done. There's no personalization. There's no trying to tailor it to their persona, right? This is still me trying to be as risk averse as possible and just see what this topic does to people. Like, I'm not trying to go in deep. I'm just testing. And so I did want to kind of connect those points and say that this is the same kind of angle or design for the intro as the first one. I just had a different thread to pull through.
And so another thing that I like about it is, like you said, in every line, there's some red, right? Every line has the incentive based around the guide. And I think when I look at this, by the way, so the reason this email excites me is because the number of other emails and plays you can run off of this topic of a guide of new ways to quickly unearth talented job seekers is huge. You can write emails about some points in that guide. For me, I think, oh man, if I was a rep, I would go on and I would go to their active job postings for some of my bigger target accounts that I wanted to really tailor and look and see, hey, there's this posting on LinkedIn that says it's been up for 30 plus days, or it's been up for 29 days or whatever it is. Like, these job postings are up for a long time. You could start doing a video around that, with your screen share and talking about your expertise and how, depending on the role, like there's just so many value add ways you can, different emails and plays you can put in a sequence that's around this type of topic, structured around a couple of key pieces of content, like a guide and around talent acquisition, particularly, just because talent acquisition is a moving target. And right now it's a buyer's market, right? There are more jobs than there are people to fill them in a lot of industries. So our company is if you're a salesperson or an SDR in Atlanta, we're hiring for full cycle sales reps in Atlanta, plugging Sysnet Global Solutions. Go check us out, www.sysnetgs.com. But we're having trouble filling those roles, right? There is a talent shortage, and so what I'm saying is like, when you so the email above, if you were to just go and extrapolate off of that, you would have to keep playing off of a couple of those problems in that story. Like you said, you shoehorn yourself into a situation where you paint yourself into a corner with that assumption. You can't get outside of that assumption. Otherwise, you have to kind of start all over. But this leaves you so much creative liberty and so many directions you can go to get conversions, right? Like, and to provide value and to find different problems, because finding ways to unearth job seekers or talent acquisition is a rabbit hole, right? I mean, there's so many different ways and things you can do. So I just am excited for emails like this that give the rep creative liberty to go and find more problems and a little bit more latitude in the sequence than just trying to break down 3 or 4 different problem archetypes from a persona, stamp them out, put them in outreach and run it. So that's why I really like it.
Yeah. Well, I think I love the fact that my story is shorter. That's my favorite part about this one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 words. True talent is hard to find and even hard to replicate. That's the beauty of copywriting. It's like sometimes you think you need to like explain this overbearing story that is supposed to be the guiding light that all prospects use to get to the place that you need to like sell them, right? And then you have lines like this where it's like sometimes all you really need to do is just say things that like both you and the prospect know are true, but in that context and that position in a message, it's everything, right? If I were to just say true talent is hard to find and even harder to replicate, and I'm not talking about a guide, well, it depends on where I go with it, right? If I start talking about my brand, it's salesy. If I start talking about how awesome I am at finding and replicating talent, then it's kind of arrogant, right? But because I'm using it in the context, I'm using this short story in the context of a guide, of some value that I'm giving. It's not really me bragging about myself. It's really honestly me being helpful and explaining more to the prospect. Like, oh, hey, I made a guide. Here's why it's important. Here's why you should stop and read the rest of this email. So to kind of recap, I did want to go into the future and kind of next steps on this email. So, this was version 1 and then a version 2 in, a real campaign that we're running. And this one is relatively new. So not a lot of data to go off of, but I can tell you that we're already starting to see better traction with this version as step 1. We're getting more positive responses and force sending to less people, which is kind of the guiding light that we go to in the first 60 to 90 days. So what I'm going to be doing next, and what I tend to do next with emails like this, is you want to mix and match and play around with the topics and the themes of your emails until you can get a good 1, 2, 3 punch, like a good first 3 steps and 3 good topics that you can reliably use to start a conversation path with prospects. But then from there, I would be going straight into intros. I said that at the beginning of this episode, but intros are tough. Most of the time, I feel like intro lines are the reason why emails don't get opened or responded to. And so, like, even with this intro, we've been talking it up the whole time. I feel like this intro is much better than the original, but I'm ready to roll in a new one and get rid of the stale ones and actually figure out how to not only say these factual things and come off as compelling, but do it in a creative way. Do it in a way that maybe my clients' competitors haven't thought of, or maybe in ways to where prospects will resonate uniquely so because of a market trend or maybe a well-timed market event. And so that's the beauty of testing. For anyone who tests their cold emails or wants to get started, what I'd recommend you do is always starting from the intro line first. Subject lines are great. Subject lines are fine-tuning. I'd say really the main thing you need to be looking at is 1, are you having a good enough first sentence to get people to just open it? And then 2, do you have a good enough body and CTA to actually get them to follow through on next steps? And so start with the intros, see how it affects your open rates, and then you can move on further into the email message from there.
I think that's a great tip. And yeah, I think people do we've talked about my opinion of subject lines. I think people put too much stock in them, especially since I don't really read them. I read the preview. I read that text preview. I don't know.
Sure.
That can be, so I'm biased because because my firsthand experience is so strong, I'm sure people read subject lines, but I'm just saying that, like, I think your advice to start with that intro and go from there is a good one. Because I think people get hung up on the subject line. I'm like, guys, the subject line is a toss up. I mean, at least in my opinion, I don't know that I've really ever compelled somebody via subject line, unless it's like, your boss told me to send you this email, essentially, or your best friend from college said we should connect. Like those I know people see them and they go, oh, I'm going to open this. But information for your company or what? I get a ton of those, right? The generic ones. I'm like, okay, I already know what this is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, great. I really love seeing the evolution of that, because, and you talking about the process, I think it's super valuable for people to see how to experiment and how to iterate. And I mean, just how it works. Like that, the first email was decent, but the second email was so much better. And you get to see that evolution. And of course, you get the feedback and the data from it, the analysis, I love the idea of like good copywriting being the difference in lowering the barrier to entry to conversations, because it really is. And most people are way too direct. They are not, I don't want to say good, but they are not skilled writers, like you said, at structuring ideas together. A lot of times it is 3 disjointed ideas put in a paragraph, or 3 disjointed sentences aligned with a call to action, right? And you can that's not going to be very effective. And this really demonstrates how you can simplify your story got simpler. There's less story, less things in your story, right? But the ideas are so much more coherent that this email reads like there's more in it. There is less, but it feels mentally like there's more, because the ideas are connected and they work together, and it provides this, like, I don't know, psychological lift or momentum to converse. It's really interesting just how, like, you can really see it between the 2 emails. This is a really good case study in copywriting, I think, in making ideas flow together.
Well, maybe we'll have to revisit this one, or maybe choose another good one to kind of go through some testing cycles. Because I do think that's something we don't cover a lot, because we tend to be very tactical and specific to the use case that we're looking at. But general best practices for just how to go through, review data, and then test an email, or any sort of sequence or cadence would be pretty interesting. All right, Austin, looks like we're a little bit over time. So thank you for everyone. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Make sure to hit subscribe, and we'll be here every Monday, 11:30 a.m. Eastern. We will not be here next week. It will be Memorial Day, so we will be out during that day. But join us in 2 weeks, Monday, 11:30 a.m. For another episode of SD Rescue.
Thank you, everybody.